morning, everyone. Viewers, welcome to an in-conversation session as part of the GCC Conclave 2024 event. Today, we are going to talk to Outsystems. Outsystems is a low-code platform that was launched in 2001 as an organization based out of Portugal. It has grown pretty fantastically over the last 20 to 23 years and has been extensively funded and became a unicorn in 2018. We today are joined by the country head and solution architect of Outsystems, Krishna Gangatharan. Krishna, a warm welcome and thank you for being in conversation with us today.
Thanks a lot, Namita. I am Krishna Gangatharan. I am the country head for Outsystems India, heading the solutions architect team. Outsystems is a platform that helps companies develop, deploy, and maintain mission-critical applications by unifying and automating the entire software lifecycle.
Fantastic. And that, viewers, is also an important topic that we are going to touch on today. Our theme is lowering the barriers for AI adoption among enterprises, and low-code, no-code is a great way to be able to do that and to take this entire AI adoption journey at scale. So, Krishna, it's wonderful that we are going to get some perspectives from you about how Outsystems was created, the sole purpose of the organization, because I know that the organization is really, really focused on this. And we would also love to understand from you the broader perspective about how organizations should be looking at AI adoption using such platforms and in an era when we are talking about generative AI. So I'll quickly get started. My first question to you will be this. We've heard a lot of senior executives from the hyperscalers, the big techs like AWS, NVIDIA, Microsoft, etc. All of them, ever since the launch of generative AI in November 2022, with ChatGPT 3.5 coming in, that coding languages are going to become redundant. Software engineering may not be that important or may not be that critical a skill. How do you see this aspect, given the context of the formation of Outsystems and how you are thinking about your portfolio of offerings today?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Namita. Great question to start the discussion, right? I know, like you said, a lot of people are talking about coding as a discipline. It is going to slowly fade away, right? But from our perspective, there is generative AI advancements that we are talking about. And like you said, 3.54 is already here. And it is only going to get more robust and it is going to get more efficient in generating code, right? But when we are specifically talking about coding as a discipline, what we strongly believe in is basically, while the automation is great, it is unlikely that the entire coding language as a discipline will be completely obsolete in the future, right? Because that is the ability of running a program on the, on your computers, etc. Right? So nature of coding, however, is going to change. The skill sets that is required to create these applications on scale, run these applications, etc., are going to change due to generative AI. And it is going to continuously evolve, right? Evolve into something better. And for example, prompt engineering as a discipline was not available pre-generative AI era, right? So prompt engineering as a discipline has completely taken over how efficiently you get an output from generative AI, be it a code or be it a picture, etc., so on and so forth, right? So in my perspective, things are going to evolve. The skill set that is required to run and maintain these applications are going to be molded in a different package instead of completely going away.
Very interesting perspectives, Krishna. You spoke about how the skill sets are going to change, and we'll come to that. But a more pertinent question for you. We've seen a lot of activity here. We've seen with the GitHub, with the Microsoft Copilot, a lot of code companions have come up. Organizations are also thinking about how they can effectively use LLMs for automating or augmenting their software development life cycles. What are your perspectives? What are some of the critical elements required in order to leverage these LLMs for applications development, for SDLC augmentation?
Sure. Excellent question, Amita. There are 4 or 5 points on a high level I wanted to touch about regarding this, right? The first is the use case suitability. So we have a lot of large language models out there which are specializing in, very specific tasks. So when it comes to code generation, there are 3, 4 LLMs which are really good, and the accuracy of these large language models are growing, right? So my first point, when we talk about, how should we adopt LLM or which LLM to pick, I would say use case suitability is going to be the first factor that we need to consider. Whether this is an internal facing application, what is the functionality of this application? Is it going to contain core operatives within the business, or is it just an employee facing portal? So the use case that we want to generate code for is going to dictate which large language model to use. So before making a selection, I would say that the first thing to consider is that what are you going to use it for, should be the first thing, right? And the second very important thing is about governance and compliance. So we need to pick a large language model that is helping us control the output in terms of, the suitability of operating with your enterprise data, because data, as you know, is very, very important, and exposing data to these large language models can be tricky sometimes, or rather I would say it is still maturing. So governance and compliance would be the second important point, where you need to expose your existing enterprise data in a secure manner, so that these large language models can give a very specific output that can work with your the enterprise, basically, right? And the third is the data availability in itself to train these large language models to give a good output, right? So every enterprise today has a lot of data occurred over a period of time, in TBs and petabytes, etc. So how effectively can we expose this data should be the third consideration. And quality of data, how do we pre-process the data to train your large language model? That would be the third consideration. How easy it is to do it, basically, how far, rather how faster you can generate value out of it, right? And the fourth point also I wanted to talk about here is the skills and expertise of doing it. And like you called out in the initial stage, the skill set required to undertake this massive operation also kind of helps a lot. What do I mean by that? And maybe I can take an example and explain, like, what do we mean by skill set is not just from a perspective of working better with these LLMs, but what we are talking about is how do we lower the barrier of making sure that anybody can work with these LLMs with the above said factors, like from a governance and compliance perspective, data quality perspective, use case suitability perspective. So as a framework, low code is something goes better with generative AI that helps you in basically lowering the skill set for generative AI adoption. Right, so that is the fourth point I wanted to talk about, is like consider getting something like a low code framework that can help accelerate your Gen AI adoption. Right, the last point I wanted to touch about is also about the scalability. When we talk about scalability, can you start small based on what is the need right now? And can you seamlessly expand or scale it to the level of operations that your enterprises are operating at this point in time? So generally, the LLMs comes with number of tokens, etc., as a consumption model. So from a scalability perspective, all we are talking about here is, today you purchase a certain amount of computing and then see if you can, without having to change the provider, can you scale it to your enterprise operation level, right? So these are the top 5 points I would say that we need to, from our experience, that you need to consider in, when you are selecting an LLM for application development.
Fantastic, Krishna. I'll just quickly summarize for our viewers. The 5 points were, and very, very crucial to begin with use case suitability. Think about governance frameworks not as an afterthought, but actually along with the use case, because that also determines the next step, which is how are you going to treat your data? and what kind of data is going to be used in the models for pre-training. Also, the kind of, the use case also decides then that the kind of usability and the scalability of the application that is being built. And not in the least at all, the right kind of skill sets, and definitely having the right kind of platforms, particularly low-code, no-code platforms, making it a lot easier for adoption, even by the non-tech users. So that's fantastic. And I think while discussing this, Krishna, you've already also addressed some of the challenges that might be there, right? Because all of these are also difficult to do and difficult to do well. But in your perspective, what are some of the key barriers that organizations or your clients that you hear in your conversations face today when it comes to not just using LLMs for application development, but also thinking through scale, right? And when we talk about scale, it's going to be infrastructure. It's going to be much more scalable use cases and more use cases, and it's also going to be skill sets. So how do you see organizations think through this? Where are the big pain points?
Excellent question again, Namita. Thanks for that. Uh, the first pain point I see is integration with the existing systems, right? All these enterprises have a large amount of data, applications, everything, the pre-existing operations, everything is already running, right? So when they are adopting AI, generative AI into the enterprise, the existing data that needs to be exposed, right? So it needs integration with multiple systems currently so that it can utilize the data, learn it effectively, and then add value to that organization, right? So the first barrier I see basically is the ability to integrate these large language models or generative AI models into your existing applications and your existing infrastructure. So how do you securely do that, right? So that is the first item that I have seen very often, the CIOs and CTOs are struggling with in today's enterprises. And the second point is about lack of skilled AI talent. Again, goes back to skill in terms of, do we have enough trained people within the company to expose this data, our current data, and get meaningful output out of it, right? So that is again another issue that we've seen, not issue, but adoption barrier that we have seen in the market. And the third is the data quality aspect of it as well, right? So how much amount of pre-work I need to do, how much inherent bias that I need to remove from my existing data set so that I can get a quality generative AI output. And so that is the third barrier we've seen. We've seen a lot of people investing a lot of money in pre-training or pre-cleaning the data so that the generative AI results are not biased. And finally, the adoption that we are the adoption uh, barrier that we are talking about is the lack of trust and understanding, because the industry is very, very, very rapidly evolving. Might have already seen the statistics around the adoption of Gen AI, right? ChatGPT got so many users in the first 24 hours that even mobile phone took 10 years to get there, right? So the industry is rapidly evolving. The number of large language models are rapidly evolving, and lack of understanding in terms of what to do, going back to your previous question in terms of how do you select LLMs. So there is a lot of lack of understanding, misconceptions around what is happening is also there. That is also kind of stopping people from adopting this at scale, uh, is what I would say as a fourth point.
Very interesting, Krishna. You spoke about a lot of these misconceptions, and we are also hearing in our conversations that there's a lot of reticence or hesitation among the customers when it comes to fully embracing Gen AI, experimenting with it, because there's this trust issue, right? They're not able to trust the outcome, and that kind of in the beginning seems to add on to what you would say as the workload, which instead should have been reduced for the software engineers or the software developers. Great that you mentioned that. My question to you would be, how should organizations then think about or go about selecting pilot projects? Use case definition is difficult. So, what are some of the most important things to keep in mind when organizations are going for? Uh, and I would, kind of broaden the question not just from a Gen AI perspective, but from an AI perspective, because Gen AI and AI, they would probably solve similar larger problems. How should organizations go about finding the right kind of pilot projects, putting the right kind of resources, mobilizing the right kind of skills to make it an early success so that they can scale and carry on the momentum?
No, absolutely. Namita, the first point I would say in selecting a pilot project should be aligning the business value
Mhm.
with the strategic goals the company wants to pursue. Right? Choose the projects that might have a good potential to deliver significant business value at the first go, so that everybody gets interested and continue to build the momentum. Basically, if it is a large enough project with smaller outcomes, then people will soon lose interest and think that maybe generative AI is not for our enterprise, right? So the first suggestion I would say is uh, think about the business value, align with your strategic goals, and pick a pilot that is going to satisfy these both these conditions. Right?
And that's also very tricky, right, Krishna? Because it's very scary to pick a
Right,
very, very significant business metric and then rally, the leadership around that and take that up. And somewhere down the line, if things don't work out, there's this very high risk of failure. And then
very
how does the organization pick up the pieces and start again? So, any specific advice just on this? Because you mentioned, and I know a lot
sure.
of companies kind of stall there. How should they really go about, convincing and creating a business case that is very impactful?
Excellent point, right? As you said, if you are creating a very if you are putting your stakes on a very high impact project early in the cycle or at the adoption phase, then it is definitely risky. So that is why we also kind of, help customers to find high value, low impact use cases. For example, just as an example, let's say if we have a large retailer basically trying to adopt generative AI for a B2C kind of a portal, then we ask the customer to first experiment with B2B, where it is still high impact, but then low volume, so that they will not, even if there are hiccups there, you would get a little bit more time to fix and move on, instead of not making a big enough mistake to again making it as a problem, right? So that is something we constantly push our customers to find that uh, high value, low impact is the quadrant I would put at. That should be the quadrant to look at for a pilot, so
I
that
mean, high value, low risk comparatively.
correct,
Got it.
exactly.
Got it. Got it.
So that is what I would suggest our customers basically.
Understood. And also, as one final question, because we've spoken consistently about skills,
Correct.
how are you looking at building the skill sets for today? And I believe as the technology is changing very quickly, organizations are also thinking about skills of the future, or
Mhm.
at least the near future. How are you thinking about it?
So from a skills perspective, Namita, what we are talking about is, like we spoke earlier, right? People are going to keep uh, reinventing themselves, remolding their skill set into something that is going to help them in the generative AI era. What do I mean by that is that, instead of creating a business logic previously, complex business logic using coding, now the same engineers might actually remove bias and discrimination from an AI engine, for an example, right? So these skills would be reused, just that the way that are getting reused is going to change. With end of the day, the skill of a software engineer is going to be the same, that is coding. But using coding, are you achieving a business outcome, versus a technical outcome is what is going to change, right? It has been a focus on technology till now, but with generative AI taking the load away from developers in writing technical code, developers would now have to realign themselves to create business outcomes instead of writing codes, basically, because generative AI is going to generate those codes. How do you effectively generate these codes for a business outcome is what we think the developers will reshape their skill as. And as far as from a misconceptions perspective, people are talking about job displacement. That is one common misconception I see from a skills perspective, but I don't think that is going to be true. Again, like we said, the entire force, the developer force is going to be augmented into something else, basically, right? Around generative AI. And the second misconception is also about the lack of control. In the sense, if generative AI is generating the code, how much control does the developer have over it to change the code that is being generated, right? There is no human oversight. You are just talking about what is the outcome that you want to achieve, and these generative AI application development platforms gives you the code, right? So that who takes responsibility of that code? Lack of control is what we would call it as, right? So the developers, from a skills perspective, they would start learning about how to work with generated code instead of they writing hand coding themselves. We call it as traditional development process, right? So people will going to start changing their mindset around somebody else is going to generate the code, and I'm going to make sure that this code does exactly what I'm asking it to do. And so that is a second misconception, and a skill adjustment that we see happening. And the third is also, we think there is going to be a lot of emphasis on security. Um, Generative AI or not, you can see that we've already been talking about security a lot in the recent past, due to multiple incidents, etc. So I think the security engineering is going to, people are going to double down on security engineering from a development perspective. That will also create more skill advantages of existing developers to make sure that security conscious development is what is going to take center stage, where these guys, the developers manual effort is going to go into securing the code that is automatically generated by Gen AI. Right, so these are some areas where I think the skills will be repurposed into from a developer community perspective.
Fantastic points, Krishna, and great that you mentioned that there's a lot more scope when it comes to embracing Gen AI in terms of skilling up and skilling to do better things, more business value added, tasks and activities than to just worry about the technicality of the code. So with that, it was wonderful conversing with you today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving us your time and some very, very great insights on this very, very critical topic that's confounding most of the customers, because there's lack of information, there's lack of understanding, and technology is moving at a unbeatable speed. So wonderful to have you here and demystify a lot of this for us. Viewers, this was a fantastic conversation with Outsystems Country Head and Solutions Architect Krishna Kumar Gangadharan. Do stay tuned for the next series of conversations. Till then, thank you. Bye-bye.